Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today I have not one, but two very special guests joining me. We're going to be talking to both Carol Hughes and Bruce Fredenburg, my two friends from California. I mentioned earlier, I so miss being out in Southern California where you both are. But Bruce and Carol recently released an amazing book. Carol sent me a copy of it a while ago. I'll tell you all about that, but it's called Home Will Never Be the Same Again, a guide for the adult children of gray divorce. And I was just mentioning to Carol and Bruce, I just had on Ashley Nicole Russell, one of my friends who is an adult child of divorce. She was not an adult when her parents went through it, but she talks a great deal about the difficulties that her parents' divorce brought into her life. And I think that this is just such an important topic for families, for the children, and for professionals to hear. And my listeners are all of the above. So first, let me just thank you both for taking the time to come on the show and talk about the book.
Thanks for having us, Susan. And we're really happy to be here, Susan.
We are.
Yeah, this is, you are both, to give a little bit of a background so that everybody knows, sort of your background on what you bring to the book, is you're both licensed California marriage and family therapists and very lucky to be located in Laguna Hills, one of the most beautiful areas of California. I spent a lot of time there. We have friends who live there, and just a beautiful area. And you've both been in practice for quite some time as therapists working with families, but you're both mediators, collaborative professionals. You've really been in this world, helping families through all phases of divorce, and have brought a particular area of expertise to the forefront in helping the adult children of gray divorce with this book, which is something that I think has sort of slipped through the cracks. So again, I'm really thrilled that we're talking about this. And I thought a great place to start would be with why you decided to write this book. Bruce, what brought it to the forefront for the two of you?
Well, it's actually a great story, and in a large part it's Carol's story, but I think she likes me to tell it because it's her story, and who wouldn't want to hear a great story? Carol, well, we're founders of Collaborative Divorce Solutions in Orange County. And one of the attorneys we work with some years ago pointed out to Carol that adult children are major stakeholders in their parents' divorce. And people don't recognize that. And it's a legal term, but it really resonated. And then years later, Carol wrote a blog article for our practice group. And it was picked up by a writer from the New York Times a few months later, I guess, who was researching the title, the topic. And so she interviewed Carol, and it got published. And because it's the New York Times, it goes everywhere. And some months later, a literary agent for one of the, one of the big literary houses in New York saw it. It resonated with her, and she called up Carol and asked if she would be willing to write a book about it. And Carol said yes, because she's smart that way. And she said yes to opportunities. And then she called me up because we've been friends since graduate school. And so we've known each other for decades. And we have a number of unfinished books in our computers that we keep saying, well, let's make it this one, let's make it that one, never knowing it would be adult children of divorce. But this came to us, and Carol said, well, would you like to do it with me? And I said yes, never knowing at the time that I was signing on to a 4-year journey of research and writing and editing and back and forth. But now the book is out, and people tell us they really like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing topic, and it's the book. I've read the book, and it's just so well done because it has that depth of both the research side of things, but also both of you having been in practice, helping people for so long. It has that wealth of of your experience and expertise as to, leading names in the field. I have to tell you, Carol and I met. Most of my listeners know that I also do trainings with Woody Mostyn, and Carol and I met when she was one of our guest coaches in one of our trainings, and Woody complimented and congratulated Carol on the release of your book. And when Carol mentioned you were talking about what the book was about, instantly for me, bells were going off that I needed to have the two of you on the show. I needed to read the book and we needed to talk about this. And we were just talking a minute ago about this. There's something about the fact that when parents go through a divorce and their children are adults, they're over 18 even, but often it's these days, kids are in their 30s and 40s. It's almost like they're just forgotten in the entire mix. And I'm just wondering, why is there maybe a lot of attention on younger children when parents divorce, but almost no attention on adult children when their parents divorce?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, Susan, and we wondered the same thing. And it turns out, of course, that in the industrialized countries, which includes the United States, there is a myth that because children are adults, if their parents divorce when they're adults, that they'll just roll with it. They're adults, they've got their own lives going at one level or another, young adults, middle adults, older adults. And, they'll just deal with it. And aren't you glad that you weren't 6 years old when your parents divorced? And I think the second reason which helps this myth proliferate is that in the legal system, as you know, because you're an attorney, family law attorney, the courts don't have jurisdiction over adult children. And so it's very easy for attorneys, family law attorneys, to tell the parents, well, your adult children don't matter. And we've had, I don't know how many family law attorneys tell us they've said those exact words to their clients and now feel horrible about it now that they're realizing how much, pain the adult children could be in too. So those are, I think, two of the main reasons.
Yeah, I think that's so significant what you just said there about in the divorce process itself, especially in the more antiquated, litigated approach. You're 100% correct, right? There's no jurisdiction over what happens with your children who are usually, they're over the age of 18. So they're just not a part of the like thinking about them is not a part of the process. We don't have to wonder how they're going to go back and forth between mom and dad's household,
right? What
type of child support is going to be paid. But it extends even further because, one of the things that you talk about quite extensively in the book is this prevalence of gray divorce. And it's interesting. I just had Lily Vasileff on, who's one of my colleagues from Connecticut, talking about the financial impact for the adults going through gray divorce. And she was talking about the statistics that the incidence of people getting divorced after a long time married, 20, 30 years, or just later in life is really on the upswing. And I know that you did a lot of research into why that's happening as well. I'd love to get some of your thoughts behind just that upswing.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Actually, it's a worldwide phenomena in the developing world, and we found that different countries have different names for it. Into our northern neighbors in Canada, they refer to them as diamond divorcees, at least in Toronto. The British call them silver splitters. I forget what the Australians call them, but we think the Japanese may have really nailed it with retired husband syndrome. And
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I bet you
yeah,
do.
lots of people say. So there's a lot of things that come into it. Number one, I believe, is that people are, if not living longer healthy, so more active years ahead. So some couples weren't that great a match in the first place. The decisions we make at 18, 19, 20, 21 may not be what we would have decided at 50. But they had kids and they were building careers and they were just doing what people do at that time in life, and maybe didn't notice that or care that they were building parallel lives. Or other times people started off with good relationship, but again they got caught up in the business of family life without nurturing the relationship, and after 25 years, 30 years, who knows, they're looking, the kids are gone. They're either retiring or they're just looking at their partner and thinking, I don't really know this person very well, or maybe I don't even like them, or maybe I can't tolerate them, depending on what's been going on. And I've got another 30 or 40 years left, and I don't want to spend my life in a sentence. It's not an endurance race. And then there's the fact that since the late 60s and into the 70s, the second wave of feminism, women started getting more, not just employed, but in professions and moving up, and going from not being able to have their own credit counted in the early 70s
Right.
to
Couldn't get our own credit cards.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so they're not dependent on their husband economically the way previous generations may have been. In fact, some are a bit bigger earners than their husbands. So they're not constrained by that. And then there's been a shift in the public acceptance of divorce. In 2001, 45% of Americans felt divorce was a morally acceptable choice. But by 2014, it had risen to 69% and possibly even higher than that now is what we're thinking. So the stigma has been taken away for a lot of people. And then because so much weight is put on a marital relationship other than just being a good breadwinner or a good mother, parent, or, till death do us part, I'll just hang in there no matter what. People are valuing happiness and fulfillment in their life. And especially if they got 20 or 30 or 40 years of life left, they don't want it to be a prison sentence. So we think all those things together have been the source of this.
Mhm.
Oh, the numbers are amazing too. Just in the United States, over 300,000 couples in this demographic divorce every year. So that's 600,000 people. And they have on average 1 to 2 children. So between 900,000 and 1.2 million people enter this demographic in the United States every year. And because it's an unserved population, it's most likely the ones who were hurting last year and the year before are still hurting. And the ones who are hurting this year will be hurting next year.
Right. It's first I have to get that Japanese name for the retired husband syndrome, because the minute you said it, it brought to mind for me. It was actually one of my very first gray divorces as a practicing litigator, a practicing attorney. And it was a couple who'd been married for 43 years. And he had a job where he worked day shift, and she had a job where she worked the night shift. And that went on pretty much for 25, 30 years of their marriage. And then he retired and they were in the house together. And within 6 months, they were getting a divorce. They found that they really had gone through a life together but didn't really much like to be together. And I think that was a mutual decision. But significantly for this interview and for your book, they had 3 adult children, and these people have been married 43 years. These were adult children, 30, 35, 40 years old. They got pulled into that divorce tragically. It was a very difficult process. It came up to almost the trial door, and what stopped the trial in this case, and I remember this so significantly, and very, this was earlier days in my career, one of the adult children showed up to testify in court the day of the hearing of the final trial. And my client said, I'm not doing that. He changed some of the things that he was willing to put on the table, but it was devastating for every single member of that family. For me, I felt horrible. It was just a horrible experience. And that's so much of what you're writing about and what you're talking about, and how that shouldn't be a part of this process. But I think that, people just don't even, or they overlook the fact that their adult children are even going to be impacted. It was a complete and utter shock to my client when his son walked into that courthouse. And, is it that the parents later in life are just not able to see how much their divorce is impacting their adult children?
Mm-hmm. I think, that's true. And as we talked about earlier, it's easy to compartmentalize and think, well, your adult children are adults and they're just going to roll with this, as opposed to minor children. They're relieved that they didn't get divorced, when their children were minor children. And what parent really doesn't want to think that their children are okay? And so it's kind of seductive that way for them to think that. But when you really think about it, I and you're probably the same, Susan, I've never, and very, very few times can I say never in my field, I've never met an adult who's going through divorce who didn't have some painful experiences and feelings, even if they were the one initiating the divorce, they wanted the divorce, they thought they'd be happier, they're still grieving, sadness, anger, fear, worry, frustration. There's so many negative feelings. And so why would parents think that their adult children aren't having some of these feelings and experiences too? It really is kind of shocking, but yet understandable how they could be thinking that.
Yeah, I think there's almost something, so many people say they're going to stay together for the kids until the kids are adults. For some reason, graduation from high school for so many parents seems to be that threshold line.
Exactly,
yeah, now they're adults and now it's okay for us to get divorced. And, every adult, I have so many, I personally am not a child of divorce, but I have many, many friends. And I've obviously over 30 plus years of being a divorce attorney, been through the experience and talked to many adult children of divorce. And I don't know a single one of them who has not carried the impact of that divorce in some way. Yes. Forward from the time of the divorce. But the other thing that we see, and we talk about this so much with younger children, how they can be parentified during the divorce process to take care of their parents or take care of the parent who's having more difficulty. And I actually, in the cases where the children are adults, I actually see that much more significantly.
Yes.
Because they are adults.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's very common. And it really is quite unfair to the adult children because they do have their lives to live. There may be at different stages, young adults are just in college or doing some professional training, some kind of training. Maybe they're working. Sometimes they're more dependent on their parents financially than some of the more mature, shall I say, adult children. And often they have to drop out of their schooling or their training because the parents can't help them any longer, which is not uncommon. Then the middle-aged adult children often have their own families going, their careers going, and they're feeling what we call in that sandwich generation, where they're worrying about their parents who are older, maybe infirm, maybe naively vulnerable to con people or, grifters trying to take their money. And so they're trying to live their lives and then worrying and being involved in their parents' lives. And then the oldest adult children are even older, of course. We have a colleague who told us a month or so ago that she had a 92-year-old man who came into her office to talk about filing for divorce, but he was worried how it would affect his 60-something-year-old children. So good for him that at least he thought of that. And so you can imagine those oldest adult children are even more concerned about their aging parents. The research, the little bit that's been done on adult children of gray divorce is studies 18-year-olds up to 50-year-olds. That's the population so far that's been studied. And they report exactly what you were saying, your experience was, Susan. No, I'm not happy I wasn't 6 years old. Could I pick that? Well, I can't now. But I've been on the planet longer than a 6-year-old. I've got much more involved and invested in my family of origin, holidays together, celebrations, whatever, looking forward maybe to go back to the family home, take my children where I grew up, all these things. Not saying that it doesn't hurt minor children, of course, but let's think about all the losses that and all the nevers that adult children are facing. It's really significant.
It makes me wonder too, is there an element for adult children where their history somewhat gets rewritten as well? And
Yes.
because now the maybe happy childhood that they thought they had doesn't bring into question for them some emotional or just challenge their memories of their childhood.
Sure. It's pretty natural that people look back on events in their life that now have a different meaning to them. We've heard people say, was it all smoke and mirrors?
Mhm.
Or am I going to be just like my dad or just like my mom? And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And am I going to mess up my marriage? Or maybe I'm not even suited to have a marriage. Maybe I should never have one. And as Carol went through the different stages of development and all the nevers that people have to deal with, never going to see my parents in the same room again, or I've got kids and these are their grandparents, and how do I explain to them that grandma and grandpa don't love each other anymore, and how do I explain it to myself? Or when a parent starts to make their adult child their confidant and wants to share their sexual disappointments or their financial resentments, or looking for an ally against the other parent, and then these loyalty issues show up, and then it just starts to tear people apart. And one of the things we advise parents of adult children is to be proactive. Go talk to your own siblings who are the aunts and uncles and maybe grandparents of your adult children, and tell them that you don't want your children forced into these bash the other parent conversations. You don't want them to take up sides. And we counsel them. It's the idea they have to respect those boundaries, that the relationship that the parents have with each other is a different relationship than the children have with their own. And they can look at their own lives and see that. So children are allowed to have their own relationship with each parent. And other people, they don't have the right to tell them who not to talk to. And then if the siblings choose up different sides, that starts creating problems, because then they get labeled as a traitor. And these wounds are really hard to heal. And so as they go back and rewrite their own life, or just look at their own identity, how it's been in this family, and I didn't know dad was dating a secretary all these years, or mom, with her, maybe her gym coach, or maybe her boss, or maybe she's the boss, and her, one of her underlings, and
Right.
Just all these questions come up, and it's not too surprising. They're all really disturbing, and some people cope with it by just withdrawing, and it affects their own new family, because if someone can't show up at the grandkids' birthdays or somebody's graduation or a wedding without making it all about their pain, or if they're taking too many resources away from the family, the other spouse, it's not their parents divorcing, it's their husband or wife's parents, and they may say, I'm not going to put my kids through this anymore. They're just not going to see the grandkids. And so these just become dominoes if people don't learn to not do these things.
I think that's so interesting that you mention the peripheral family members in this conversation as well, right? Because it's not just what mom and dad, or mom and dad say to their adult children. The entire family system sort of comes in with their own layers of this information. And I think people have less discretion when speaking to adult children whose parents are going through divorce, right? They're like, oh, you're grown-ups. We can be a little more real with you than we would be with your 6-year-old self.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the fact that dad was having an affair with the secretary, or mom was messing around with someone who worked for her. And family members lose a little, or just people in general, right? The society tends to lose a little of the filter that we might have with a younger child. And it's interesting though, because there's also a flip side to that. And I'd love to get your take on this. I just had a guest on recently who was talking about the fact that she had an older child who came to her and said, who was just old enough to know that if mom and dad's marriage is breaking down right now, somebody did something and I want to know what it is. And so the child actually said to her mother, one of you cheated on the other one. I know that happened. So just tell me so I know. And the parent in that moment in time did not know what, the popular wisdom is your children don't need to know the adult issues. But now you're talking to an adult. What do you tell your adult when they ask you bluntly what's going on?
I think it's important to educate our adult children. And just because it's no different, frankly, than when minor children ask a question. Every question that's asked doesn't deserve the answer that the young person is thinking they're going to get. So we know this working in our field, in the field of marriage and family work, is that typically, and there are some exceptions, but typically when couples go into the divorce process, they both have some contribution to that situation. And often an affair is emblematic of the issues in the marriage, as you were describing that couple who had been married 43 years. They were passing ships in the night, so to speak, never
literally
literally never seeing each other. And there are all kinds of reasons, that people get to that point. The person who pulls the plug, so to speak, and files for divorce in the United States is overwhelmingly the wife, the woman. But that doesn't mean that the husband didn't contribute, to the problem, or same-sex, can be the same issues, same-sex couples. So that would be my answer. And if she were my client, I would tell her or him to educate the adult child. And I would also educate them to educate the adult child that we humans are wired to find fault, to categorize, which is finding fault is part of categorizing. Good parent, bad parent. It's part of our DNA from, cavemen times and cave women times. And so that's a natural, like a knee-jerk reaction, but it isn't information that they definitely need because it's from the spousal relationship, not the parent-child relationship. And it can damage the parent-child relationship for a while or forever.
Right.
Also, typically it's hard to educate the parent into being able to take that position that I have some responsibility for this if they're feeling like they're getting left. Because typically what we find is that until somebody actually pulls the trigger on a divorce, probably both of them are unhappy, but they each have a choice whether to divorce or not to divorce. And the person who decides to divorce usually, in my experience, doesn't give the other person a heads up, 2 months from now, I'm filing for divorce. They do research, they find out how it's going to be, where's the safe landing, get my ducks in a row. And then the other person finds out they're getting divorced. But the one who was planning the divorce still kept things intact enough so that there's a lot of family things that need both of you together to manage and take care of. And they had that, and now they're ready to go. And the other person feels like someone holding a phone wire that got ripped out. And, but why, and it's hard for them to accept their own responsibility. And it becomes a pacing issue with the couple. One's already 3/4 of the way around the track, ready to take the blue ribbon, and the other one hasn't even put their track shoes on yet because they didn't know there was a race. So we have to teach the one who's ahead to slow down so the other one can catch up. And as they move through that pain cycle, they're typically better able to acknowledge their role even if it was just choosing that other person, that's still a responsibility. But it can also be what they didn't do to nurture the relationship, or, why did they wait so long? Sometimes and we prefer to help people save relationships. We're not advocating divorce. And we have a firewall between our two practices. We don't turn our relationship couples into divorce couples that they're going to divorce. They go somewhere else. But, once somebody's made that decision, there's just so many things that have to be taken into account so that they can take some responsibility for what they did.
It's such a great point. And that is, I talk about that disparity in where people are in the process, because it's such 90% of cases, it's not been a joint discussion over a period of time to get to the point of deciding to have a divorce. It is usually exactly what you described, Bruce. One of the couple moving along the continuum, doing the research, making the plans. And the other one, I love the analogy of hasn't even put on the track shoes yet. And so I am always advising people, whether they are the asking for a divorce party or the being told we're getting a divorce party, both sides sort of need to, I call it the grace of space. The first thing you do in a divorce is nothing, or get help, speak to a therapist, find a coach to help you, start educating yourself on the different ways to move through divorce, the different mediation, collaborative, etc. But do not just immediately launch into or drag your partner into that divorce process, because everyone deserves that chance to get up to speed, but including your children. And, you know, one of the things I will say, but going back to that family, that first grade divorce I represented, you know, the kids were put in a rather impossible, the adult kids, but they were put in a rather impossible situation. And the relationship between my client, who was the father, and the adult child who showed up to testify for mom, that relationship was never repaired, but it really fractured that entire family. That one moment in time of walking into that courthouse prepared to do that fractured that family forever. And then consequently, every divorce that I was involved in with adult children, there was some effort on the part of the parents to polarize the children, to take us, they wanted those children to take a side. It almost mattered more because the kids were adults. And, you know, so how do adult children, what advice do you have for them to walk that tightrope? How can they avoid that pressure?
Right, that's a very good question. And part of that, again, is education, educating them about what we're talking about, which is why I originally wrote the first blog article and wrote many after that, that adult children say they feel invisible, or they're pulled into, you know, as you were just saying, aligning with one parent against the other, which damages their relationship with that other parent. Sometimes they're siblings, because then the siblings line up, you know, for battle zones, so to speak, battle lines. And so they need to understand, the adult children do, that they have a human right. No, there's no legal right, but they have a human right to have a relationship with both parents. They're their parents forever. Family relationships are forever, and they're primal. The research in our field shows that. The attachment bonds from when we're first born and we're with our parents, our caregiver parents, or other caregivers, but we're talking about parents right now, is for the lifetime, from cradle to the grave. And what a loss to have to lose one of those relationships. And so they need to understand that they can set boundaries. They can say, I love you, to the parent that's trying to pull them in. I'll help you find some professionals. I'm not a professional. I'll help you find some professionals who are much better equipped than I am to help you through this time, because I love both of my parents. This is a hard thing for adult children to say when they see the one parent hurting more, quote, or being, quote, victimized, feeling like a victim, the one that's been left. Usually it's that one. But it's the healthiest thing for the adult children to do and to say. And it's also the healthiest thing for their parent who's trying to pull them in, because that parent needs a better support system than their adult child. They need someone like you and Bruce and me, or a clergy person, to help them understand, you know, yeah, what is their part in this? Maybe they were just so passive, or whatever, you know, 1,000 other reasons. And so when adult children understand this, it's easier for them to set those boundaries. The other thing that we all really encourage parents to do, and it takes a while as they're going through this divorce process, is if they can choose a process like mediation or collaborative divorce that is family focused. It's family relationship focused, because divorce doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's never a neutral event for anyone it touches. And again, that's very rarely can I say never, but even if these parents argued all the time and the adult children are happy they're going to be going their separate ways, it's not a neutral event for them, because it's still the loss of their intact family and the hope and dreams that the parents could ever really heal and get along and be in the same room and all that you know. So all of that is really important for adult children to understand and for the parents to understand.
And Susan, the way we structured the book, first we had to outline the problem because, as we talked about earlier, most people don't even think of it as a problem, And then after that, we decided also we didn't want it to just be a list of problems throughout the book, and because people need help with this. So in every chapter, we also weaved strategies and tips to help people cope or what they could do in certain situations. And we illustrated, some of those experiences. And then we have a whole chapter on hope and healing with different things people can do that are helpful. And we talk about communication. Communication is really complicated. It's actually probably the most complicated things our brain does, because it's not only a mental exercise, but it's coordinating physical activity of the tongue and the mouth and the breathing and getting it just right. And then there's all these cultural factors, and men and women are raised in different worlds, and people come from different families. And so we talk about all these different obstacles to communication that's usually deteriorated by the time people are getting a divorce. And we even had a guest writer do a chapter for us, Sharon Ellison, who teaches non-defensive communication. And we really felt those were important things to have, tools for people to be able to do something else besides be aware of the program. So that was a lot of our thinking. And one of the things Carol likes to talk about is having people decide on their own divorce story, that doesn't have heroes and villains. It's, we were together at one time, we loved each other, things happen through life, we're not blaming each other. We don't want other people to take sides, because about 50% of adult children report being pretty disrupted by their parents' divorce, and only some of them come back and reconnect with the parents. And so if people understood that that's what's at stake, that's what's going to come out of the divorce, and what's going to affect most people is what to happen to my relationships with the people I care about going forward. And we were hoping to help prevent some of the worst mistakes.
Well, and I think that's why your book is so impactful. And I do want to point out, it's written with those tips and insights from all different perspectives. There's advice, tips, insights for parents. There's advice, tips, and insights for the adult children. And there's actually guidance for other professionals who are helping those family members through this. So it really, the book is so beautifully put together that your audience is as broad as it possibly can be, and anyone who's in one of those categories is going to benefit by being able to access the information that's in the book, which I think is incredibly helpful. I was Googling on Amazon looking for another book or other resources out there that actually address all three categories, and there isn't anything. I mean, you guys, you created it. Bravo to both of you. And I think you're going to, this is something that isn't a drop in time, that right now gray divorce is happening and then this is not going to be an issue. Gray divorce, for all the reasons that you talked about, is going to continue to be a significant preponderance of our divorcing population. And it's so important to realize that is, as you just said, it's a systemic divorce. It's a family system disruption. And it's in many ways more disruptive than a 6-year family that's being disrupted early with a divorce after being married 6 years with a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old. A family that has been intact for 30 years, the ripples of that destruction just will go out. No, I shouldn't say destruction. The ripples of that, the impact of that divorce can be much further reaching for everyone in that family. So I appreciate that you wrote the book. I really am grateful that you came on to talk about it. And Carol, you mentioned that you would gift 5 of my listeners with a copy of the book, which is so incredibly generous. Thank you. Maybe you could tell us how they would access, or how they might be able to be one of the lucky winners.
Yes, if they want to email me at all lowercase, no punctuation, Dr. Carol Hughes at me.com. So that's DrCarolHughes at me, like Mary Elizabeth.com. we will send them a code. We have an agreement with Audible, which is the audiobooks, and we will send them a code and they can listen to the book. It's read by a professional actor, and that way they can listen to it in their car or when they're gardening or however they want to do it.
Just like a podcast. So
Just like a podcast, yeah.
It's perfect. Well, I'm going to put all of that information in the show notes. I also want to mention to listeners, the book is available on Amazon. It's also one of the recommended books on the Divorce and Beyond podcast website. So if you go to the website, it's right there at the top of the list. There'll be links to the book and both Carol and Bruce's websites and additional information about both of you. But if you both like to just let people know how they can get in touch with you if they're listening right now.
Sure. So as Bruce said, we have a firewall between our different types of work that we do. My therapy website is drcarolhughes.com, www. And my divorce website is called divorcepeacemaking.com.
Love that name.
Thanks.
And Bruce?
And my therapy site is on Psychology Today under Bruce R. Fredenburg, LMFT, Bruce R. Fredenburg, LMFT. And my divorce site is orangecountydivorcecoach.com. And Carol and I can both be found on the websites of Collaborative Divorce Solutions, Orange County, CDSOC. And if somebody went to that cdsoc.com and clicked on Find a Professional, you'll find more about our profiles. And also for the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, we're both listed on their site too.
Wonderful. And I hope I'll be seeing you both in October at the IACP forums in San Diego. I'm very excited to get back to Southern California. And I will put, again, all of that contact information, both Carol and Bruce's bios and all of their information and links for the book in the show notes. And I thank you both for, you mentioned 4-year journey in writing this book. And it shows because the book is full of research and a great depth of knowledge and expertise. And I know that you have and you will continue to be helping many, many families with this book. And so I appreciate that truly on behalf of my listeners. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words.